And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. We have a new Congress in place, a Democratic majority Congress, and a president that seems to be quite beleaguered, what with mostly questioning the war in Iraq. His number two man, some would argue the number one man in the White House these days, Dick Cheney, did a very interesting interview just last week with Wolf Blitzer. We're going to be playing large segments of that interview and discussing it with my guest here, Mike Lane, Republican strategist and the president of Intelligence Strategies. Mike, welcome again to the Inside Scoop.
Mark, thank you for having me. A new day, a new dawn.
A new Congress.
Same issues.
Same issues, yes. We Democrats would like to move past Iraq, would like to get it behind us, would like to hope this weren't an issue, but unfortunately it is still a major issue. And what's interesting to me is the difference in tone between the president and his State of the Union speech, which was more conciliatory than most of the times we've heard the president, seeming to recognize the new Democratic Congress.
It was hard to notice them. They were on the larger side of the room. So
that's true, and you had Nancy Pelosi behind him with the cameras all watching. But comparing him to Dick Cheney, who seems to be still fighting the same wars and the same things that most Democrats and many Republicans rejected just months ago.
Well, I don't think the president and the vice president are on different pages here. I think they're actually on the same page. It's a difference in rhetoric, it's maybe a difference in style, and it's maybe a difference in emphasis. But as we go through what the vice president said last week with Wolf Blitzer, we'll find some things to disagree on in terms of where you might think he's off the page with the president, but I don't.
I think a lot of it, I agree, is good cop, bad cop. I'm not saying the president isn't off the page. In fact, in many ways, I would argue Dick Cheney is his id. He's what the president's really thinking when he says all those nice things in public. Let's go right to the interview, though, because there were a lot of very interesting things in it. And if you folks didn't happen to see this interview on CNN, it's really worthwhile watching the entire thing. We're going to play a lot of clips of it this hour. Of course, as always, this is a call-in show. If you want to call in, be heard, agree with Mike or me, disagree with both of us, it's easy to do. Just pick up the phones. The numbers are right there, 888-488-MARK. Let's go ahead and play a segment of the interview where Wolf Blitzer compares what the president said with what Dick Cheney has said.
Virginia said it. Here's what the president said last night.
We could expect an epic battle between Shia extremists backed by Iran and Sunni extremists aided by al-Qaeda and supporters of the old regime. A contagion of violence could spill out across the country, and in time, the entire region could be drawn into the conflict. For America, this is a nightmare scenario.
He was talking about the consequences of failure in Iraq. How much responsibility do you have, though, do you and the administration, for this potential scenario?
Now, before Cheney answers, I just want to note, Blitzer says, listen to what the president said, contagion of violence, Shia, Sunni violence, how much responsibility do you have for this? And instead of talking about the present day, it seems to me Dick Cheney's living in the past. Let me play his answer.
Well, you know, this is the argument that there wouldn't be any problem if we hadn't gone into Iraq. Now,
well, Saddam Hussein would still be in power.
Saddam Hussein would still be in power. He would, at this point, be engaged in a nuclear arms race with Ahmadinejad, his blood enemy next door in Iran.
But he was being contained, as you well know, by the no-fly zones in the north and in the south.
Wolf, the entire sanctions regime had been undermined by Saddam Hussein.
But he didn't have stockpiles of weapons.
He had corrupted the entire effort to try to keep him contained. He was bribing senior officials of other governments. The oil for food program had been totally undermined, and he had in fact produced and used weapons of mass destruction previously, and he retained the capability to produce that kind of stuff in the future.
But that was in the 80s.
You can go back and argue the whole thing all over again, Wolf. But what we did in Iraq and taking down Saddam Hussein was exactly the right thing to do.
Now you see what Dick Cheney does, Mike, because there's a lot of different things that he throws in there. But basically, Blitzer is saying, let's talk about the president. The president of the United States is saying that there's an epic battle between Shia and Sunni. There's a contagion of violence that can go through the whole region, and instead of dealing with the real consequences of our invasion, Chaney is still going back and saying, well, we really need to take down Saddam Hussein. He was a bad man.
Well, if you're willing to stipulate, Mark, to the fact that we did need to go in there and take out Saddam Hussein, then we can start talking about, what needs to be done between the Shia and the Sunni right now. I think the president has the right idea. We want to tamp down the violence. We want to use the surge and the extra American troops in the theater of battle to sort of disengage them. We want to provide the backbone to the Iraqis so they can go out and do the job of providing the safety and security for their people that they're supposed to. Recent evidence, including a great headline today, indicates that they might finally be starting to step up to the plate and doing it the way we hope. It's way too early to assess whether or not this surge is going to work, but it's way too early to assess that the surge is not going to work.
But here's the point. No one can deny that we are in the place we are now because we invaded Iraq and took out Saddam Hussein. I mean, there's no question Iraq would not be where it is now if not for our invasion.
And if you play another, I don't know which clips we're going to see tonight, but if you follow this one step further, the vice president will make the argument that it would be just as bad, perhaps worse, had we not gone to Iraq and had Saddam Hussein been left in power.
Well, but that's the question, because we have, of course, lots of Arab dictators, some 20 or more of them. And Saddam Hussein, as Wolf Blitzer points out, as Vice President Dick Cheney pointed out when he wasn't vice president, was contained. The last time he used any weapons of mass destruction were, as Wolf Blitzer points out, in the 1980s when Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld were supporting him, and he was using chemical weapons made by Bechtel Corporation, George Shultz's old corporation, and Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. were happily shaking the hands of Saddam Hussein. He was giving money to our oil companies. If he has to massacre thousands of Kurds, our government was looking the other way. Here, when he does his killings, we look the other way, but when he no longer sells oil to our oil companies, suddenly we care about the killings he did 10 years earlier.
Well, politics does make strange bedfellows, and there's an old saying, not ours, it came from another culture, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. When we were playing footsie with Saddam Hussein back in the 70s and the 80s, it was because he provided the main strategic counterweight, counterbalance to Iran at the time, which after the deposing the Shah had become the flashpoint in the Middle East. Saddam was a great counterbalance to that. They themselves had a war. We probably played both sides against the middle in that.
Not probably, we did.
All right, we may have played both sides against the middle in that one.
There's no question, historically, we did. Iran-Contra has proven it.
And it came out that, that we were able to contain that. Now, that was back in the 80s. What the president is scared of now, and what the vice president will say later on in this interview, is that we're now in the new century. We're in the 21st century. We're almost to 2010. And what kind of games are they playing now? We're not talking about inefficiently delivered chemical weapons that will stay right there on the battlefield, much less spread into the theater. We're talking about people, Saddam Hussein, if he was still there, being involved in a nuclear arms race with Ahmadinejad of Iran. And the last thing we want is those two getting nuclear weapons in a race against each other. And that's the point the vice president will make in a few minutes on this tape.
You know, Mike, I have a cartoon on my refrigerator at home. It's a wonderful political cartoon. I don't remember who did it. But it shows a piece of paper, much like this one, and someone has drawn a missile on it. And under it is the writing nuclear, spelled wrong. And it says, see, this is what we found. Saddam Hussein had pads of paper like this.
Right.
And then, of course, he makes a nice little paper airplane out of it and throws it at the guy, and the guy ducks under the desk. Did Saddam Hussein want nuclear power and to control the world? I'm sure he did. Most dictators do. But he was not doing anything because we had inspectors on the ground, we had overflight, we had him fully contained ever since the Persian Gulf War. The irony is the crimes that we complain about Saddam Hussein doing are exactly the crimes that Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. and Rumsfeld and Cheney knew he was doing and either supported or implicitly didn't stop him from doing in the 80s.
What Saddam had was the capability of kickstarting his nuclear program anytime he wanted it.
He had some paper.
Well, he could have gotten involved in the arms race, and it's likely he would have gotten involved in the arms race with Iran. There's no way he's going to let the Iranians get a nuclear weapon and him not have one. That's just not the history of those two countries. It's just
Isn't the right way to go to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon instead of invading Iraq so that it doesn't serve as an arms race for? I mean, India and Pakistan
absolutely,
are an
but
arms
if we're
race.
not
We haven't
involved,
invaded one of them.
if we're not involved in the theater, how are we going to protect that from happening? Absolutely, we need to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and I assume that's going to come up for full discussion later on tonight.
Yeah, but no, but you say if we're not involved in the theater. Look, India and Pakistan were in a nuclear arms race. India and China were in a nuclear arms race. China and the Soviet Union were in a nuclear arms race. We didn't invade any of those countries.
I think the difference is that India and Pakistan are run by governments and people, as are China and Russia.
Pakistan?
That were much. I think
not exactly a democratic nation.
No, but they're a much more rational regime than is the Iranian regime or Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Those guys were
let me venture
loony.
this. No. Saddam Hussein was a very rational dictator. He was as rational as the Soviet leadership or the Chinese leadership. He wanted to stay in power. That's what he wanted. And he wanted to stay in power more than anything, so much so that he would have easily been contained as he was in the 90s, right? I mean, he did some things on the edges, but he didn't invade another country. He could send a little money to terrorists like Hezbollah that all the other Arab countries sent.
He kicked the nuclear inspectors out. He wouldn't let them do their job.
But then they came back.
Okay, but he still harassed them. He wouldn't let them do their job freely and completely going around. Our good buddy Hans Blix,
when you compare what he's done versus all the other dictators, Syria, Iran, our friends, Saudi Arabia and Egypt run as repressive regimes as Saddam Hussein ever did. This was a two-bit dictator. I'm not defending Saddam Hussein. What I'm saying is, and what I think Wolf Blitzer is saying, is you have to compare evils here, okay? Mm-hmm. It's not remove Saddam Hussein and we have bliss, which is what Dick Cheney seemed to promise us. I mean, roses, petals, and things like that. But Saddam Hussein was not a good situation. But we are in a situation now where we have not only 3,000 Americans dead, not only tens of thousands wounded, but hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead, hundreds dying a day. And the president mentions this. He talks about the Civil War, and I think it's a fair question to say, as bad as Saddam Hussein was, contained and in the 90s, wasn't that a more stable situation with less cost in human lives in dollars than where we are today?
If indeed he was contained, that was a good situation. He was contained immediately after the first Gulf War, but he managed to somehow get out of that box. What he did, the vice president will allude to systematic bribing of international heads of governments and officials and things like that to do it. He
bribed people?
But what he did was
You're kidding me. A dictator bribed people?
By getting around the Oil for Food program, that was the key thing. When the UN became so corrupt that the Oil for Food program just melted. Yes.
What about the United States? What about? It wasn't just the UN that was profiting.
It was Kofi Annan's son who was.
Was Kofi Annan's son profiting? Absolutely, he was. Was Kofi Annan profiting? Probably. Were France and Russia profiting? You bet.
Yes, they were.
Were U.S. oil companies also profiting from all these bribes? You bet.
I don't see any evidence of that.
The United States knew all about him going around the U.S. for food program.
I don't see any evidence of that at all.
Of U.S. companies making money off oil for food?
Intentionally breaking the embargo, I don't see any evidence that the U.S. companies knew about that and were part of it.
Well, we'll talk about this another show because I will bring to you evidence.
All right.
I mean, you can argue that they just happened to find all these billions in oil contracts and they really didn't know that they were getting all of them. But I assure you, U.S. knew at least as much as France knew that they were getting around that embargo. The point is this. These dictators, of course, they're going to try to squirrel out from under these demands. And of course, he was trying in little ways, not in big ways, to get out. And every now and then he'd fly a plane over a no-fly zone and we'd shoot it down.
Every once in a while.
Testing our limits.
Right.
No, but no major invasions. Look, if you look at the history of the Soviet Union, one of the great successes we did in finally defeating the Soviet Union in the Cold War was never invading Moscow. We never put a single American life in St. Petersburg. We didn't have to. We contained them. They tried to test us. We'd shoot. We'd do stuff on the margins. But at the end of the day, we won the war without firing a single, warlike shot. Like I said, the stuff around the edges. But more Americans have died now in the war with Iraq than died in real Cold War battles with the Soviet Union. Let's say Korea and Vietnam, we're out of it. My point is this: you don't have to invade a country in order to contain it. And when, in fact, many of the Democrats voted for the war in 2002, thinking that Bush was telling the truth when he said, war is a last resort, I need this power to go to war merely to force Saddam Hussein to allow the inspectors in without harassing them. That's what he said to Congress. Half the Democrats believed him, half didn't. They're the ones who voted for the war, and they're the ones who regret their vote because they made a mistake in trusting George Bush.
Well, I would note that we still have the leading contender for the presidency in the Democratic Party who hasn't indicated that exactly that strongly yet. But
I think she will.
She might have to.
That's true too.
But let's go back to the possibility of Saddam still being there. If he was still there, there's no way he's going to let that crazy neighbor of his, Ahmadinejad, get the nuclear weapon developed and be sitting right next to him. Iraq and Iran are historic enemies. Saddam hates the Iranians anyway, and he would have restarted his nuclear arms program and his chemical weapons program, which appears to maybe have been shut down because we haven't found the evidence of it yet, but I'm still not convinced that the whole thing was...
Do you hear what you're saying, Mike?
Yeah, I do.
What we're saying is Saddam Hussein would have begun a nuclear program in order to fight Iran in the future. It would have taken several years.
And you start a nuclear war in that area, and what happens? The whole thing just degenerates. It disintegrates.
It doesn't go.
It does.
From paper to mushroom cloud in a day.
No, it takes a couple of years.
It doesn't even take a month. It takes years.
All right.
If Iraq had started building a nuclear weapons, then, heck, America supported going in to stop weapons of mass destruction. Right? I mean, that's why Americans largely supported this war, and that's largely why they don't support it now. What you're saying is, well, he had plans.
Sometimes
he had something on paper.
Sometimes you have to be preemptive in this world. You can't just wait for all the bad things to happen. You have to be preemptive. However...
Do you want to make it an international law that because you think your enemy might develop a weapon, it's perfectly legal for you to go in and invade the country?
I think it more or less already is an international law that you can do that. We have a nuclear non-proliferation treaty worldwide that virtually every country that counts is signatory to, and they have agreed under terms of international sanctions, including force, that they will not develop and possess or use nuclear weapons.
But what about writing it on a piece of paper? If I write nuclear down here, now you can kill me? I mean, that's in essence what we're saying. Saddam Hussein had nuclear on a piece of paper, therefore we could invade his country.
All right. There's no doubt, I think everyone agrees that Iran has a very active and robust nuclear weapons development program going on now.
That's a very different situation.
All right. Are you willing to concede that in the very near future, the foreseeable future, during, let's say, the Bush administration, which would give it 2 more years, that there would come a time when military force against Iran to stop that program is necessary?
You know what's unfortunate? We don't have the power. We've sent all our troops in Iraq. They're in trouble. We don't have the power to do much about it. Now, we can talk about what I'd like to do about Iran, and I think that through a combination of sanctions and diplomatic pressure, we can get Iran to back down somewhat. But honestly, the war in Iraq is a perfect example of why it's a misuse of U.S. power. I would argue that because we're in Iraq, both Iran and North Korea are taking advantage of the fact that we are very weak and we are overextended and we don't have the troops that we need to deal with far greater threats than Saddam Hussein ever was to the United States.
Well, let me suggest that we certainly do have the troops because as...
To invade Iran?
Well, as the Speaker and the Majority Leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, have argued for vociferously over the last year, we need to redeploy the troops. Well, let's just redeploy them to Iran. I mean, that's very easy.
You're willing to leave Iraq?
No, I'm not willing to leave it.
How do we invade Iraq and Iran?
No, I'm saying that if you are arguing that we don't have the troops, you're already arguing that we shouldn't be in Iraq. Well, all we got to do is make a right-hand turn, and boom, we can be in Tehran in 48 hours.
What I'm arguing is force should always be a last resort.
I agree.
If we leave Iraq, I have no problem with leaving troops in the area, on battleships, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, ready to deploy if necessary, because I think that kind of incipient threat is actually more powerful than invading itself. I actually think that Iran would fight us less if we are there in the area than if we're actually invading the country, because then they have to fight us. They have no choice. The threat of force is even more powerful than the use of force. So if we were to withdraw from Iraq and leave enough troops in the area to threaten Iran, they might well back down. But I'll tell you this, I wouldn't vote for a resolution giving the president authority to use force in Iran because I wouldn't trust him to make it a last resort.
All right. At what point in the Iranian nuclear development program do you think it becomes compelling that we need to use military force?
In my view, if Iran has, it looks like it's going to have actually a nuclear reactor creating nuclear weapons so that it can go on there and actually start creating the plutonium, the kind of thing that, frankly, North Korea has.
Right.
All right? Then I think that what Israel did with the Osirak nuclear plant in Iraq is appropriate. Not invading the entire country, but a selective bombing of one nuclear site in order to shut it down. To me, but again, even that is only after diplomacy has failed, only after sanctions have failed.
Okay, but the Iranian program is spread throughout the country. It's
it's
much more, and it's much more deeply underground than it was back in 1980 when the Israelis took them out.
We can hit him if we have to, but I don't want to even get to that point.
We can hit him definitely if we use nuclear weapons. I don't know that we want to introduce that first strike into the theater.
What we want to do is use the threat of force to prevent actual force.
Which was what we did in Iraq.
No, in Iraq we went in.
And Saddam Hussein ignored 17 consecutive resolutions of the UN Security Council.
Saddam Hussein let the inspectors in. He even let them go in the palaces. You know, the amazing thing to me is the rewriting of history. After Saddam Hussein let the inspectors back in, what Bush was saying, well, he won't allow them into this site, and that site. And lo and behold, he did let them into this site, and that site, and we invaded anyway. I remember the day of the invasion. I remember France saying, all right, just give him 30 more days. Just give us 30 more days to prove you have those weapons of mass destruction. Once you prove it, we'll be supporting you. Just show us that he's getting those weapons. Let the inspectors go throughout the country. You show us those weapons are there, and we'll be on your side. And France was right, because they never would have found the weapons, and we never would have gone to war in Iraq, and we never would have so many people dying for a mistake.
France was leading the charge in undermining the sanctions of the UN in illegal trading with Iraq.
As was our U.S. companies, as was Russia. But the point is, we went to war based on a mistake. 3,000 Americans are dead based on a mistake. Tens of thousands are wounded, 100,000 of Iraqis because, oops, our vice president believed a guy named Curveball in Germany and disregarded 99% of the evidence here.
The world is better off that Saddam Hussein is not in power.
I'm not sure that's true. I don't think it is true.
It remains to be seen what happens to Iraq. The president has a new plan, a new strategy that he's implementing.
Not a new strategy.
We'd hope to have the support of all the American people for this, but we'll see whether or not it works.
It's not a new strategy. We had that number of troops back in 95. Not 95, in 2005.
Right.
December 2005, we had the same level of troops.
Right.
So we've lowered them, we've gone back again.
Right.
That's a heck of a new strategy.
But they're going back for a specific reason this time. And, we're all just absolutely nonplussed with some of these ludicrous things that we've done over there. You know, the catch and release program of the Iranian bad guys who were there helping to direct the technology of the building of bombs and stuff like that.
Who released them? The Prime Minister, al-Maliki.
The Prime Minister, right.
That's right. The same guy that George Bush says we can trust. Let me play for you another clip from this Chaney interview that relates to all of this.
I haven't trusted him yet. The President and the Vice President say they do trust him now. The evidence is that perhaps he's turned a corner. Let's look at the clip and see what the Vice President says.
Let's look at the clip. Let me find the specific clip. Folks, we're going to take a break while I find the clip. If you want to call in, the toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back after this.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish...
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Hey, mister, studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last cup.
Oh, no, mister. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, mister, what was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm afraid we don't have the clip that I asked about, so I want to play another clip for you, Mike. And when we have a longer break, we'll find the appropriate clip. Let me play this for you, if I can.
Virginia said in his Democratic response last night,
the president took us into this war recklessly. We are now, as a nation, held hostage to the predictable and predicted disarray that has followed.
And it's not just Jim Webb. It's some of your good Republican friends in the Senate and the House are now seriously questioning your credibility because of the blunders, of the failures. Gordon Smith.
Wolf, I simply don't accept the premise of your question. I just think it's hogwash.
There were no blunders? The president himself says there were blunders.
Remember with me what happened in Afghanistan.
Now, why does Dick Cheney dispute that there were blunders? I mean, come on. Can anyone dispute that there were blunders in Iraq?
The president himself indicated that there were substantial mistakes, and I don't think the vice president would disagree with that. The vice president did not say that there were no blunders. He called hogwash the premise of Wolf Blitzer, which was that
that people were questioning his credibility.
Which is that at this point there's enough evidence that it was the wrong thing to do. And the vice president is very forcefully making the argument that no, given everything that we've accomplished in Afghanistan and Iraq to date, notwithstanding that some things are still very much in flux and need to be resolved, that the preponderance of the evidence is that it was the right decision and that things are going to come out well. That's what he was saying was hogwash when he called Wolf Blitzer's premise in hogwash.
The premise is that people are challenging the credibility of this administration.
They are.
And this is when Dick Cheney repeats the same old tired stuff again and again and again. It just causes people to say, it's like he's a broken record. Did he not know about the elections?
Of course he knew about the,
does he not see the poll?
Is a guy like Jim Webb, then I feel pretty comfortable about where we are in this whole thing. I mean, Jim Webb sat there and flat out looked into the camera and lied to the American people.
How did Jim Webb lie?
When he said that a majority of this, a majority of that, even a majority of the military no longer supports this action.
That's true.
That was a flat out lie. The military supports this in overwhelming numbers still. They're confident in their ability to get their job done. It's not just the officers, it's the troops that have been over there on 2, 3, 4 deployments. The military is behind this in overwhelming numbers, and Jim Webb flat out lied to the American people.
Big difference between officers and the troops, and you know it, right? Okay, the officers are the ones who have to look at the situation on the ground, look at it like pawns on a chessboard, figure out what is possible and what's not possible. There, the strategists, the generals, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the people at the top said this just isn't possible. We're not going to succeed here. This plan will not work. People like General Casey, people like General Abizaid. Now, the troops on the ground...
General Casey supports it.
People,
General Casey supports it. He looked at it after, his first blush was, no, I don't really think I like that. And after studying the details and seeing what the president was proposing, General Casey fully supports this.
If General Casey didn't support it, then he was shuffled around to a different position and then suddenly supported it again. The point is this, the troops themselves want to believe it can work. Of course they want to believe it can work. As John Kerry said, how can you be the last man to die for a mistake? They would believe in the tooth fairy if they had to because they're risking their lives. And it's horrible that we're sending troops out there on a plan that can't work, so they have to tell themselves it can work. And I understand that psychologically, but you can't say that because some grunt is saying, yes, I have to follow orders and I have to believe in what I have to do, which I think is a fine thing, that they support the war in Iraq. I did a show just last week with veterans who are coming home, who no longer have to be there, and they're largely opposed to this war. We saw it in the marches. We saw it in the peace marches. The main thing is that we have lie after lie after lie from this administration.
From Jim Webb is where we get the lies. You know, I mean, it absolutely amazes me that that he could get up there. Look, let me disagree with you on one thing, Mark, and that is that the troops have to believe, they want to believe, therefore they'll go into fantasy land and they will believe. Yeah. No, there is nothing more realistic than a guy who just got out of a firefight in a combat situation and knows exactly what's going on and whether or not what he's doing is worth standing up and being in harm's way for.
They have no choice. If they choose not to fight, they're put in jail.
They have no choice as to what to do, but they have a big choice as to what to believe. They're not in oh, yes, they do.
I remember when
you can't take a guy out of a
President
combat
Bush
zone.
went to Jim Webb and said, you know, how's your son doing after his son just narrowly escaped death? Now, if Jim Webb's son had said openly in his unit, you know, I've got some questions about the war, what would happen to him? You've served in the military. If someone in your unit said, you know what, I'm not sure we're doing the right thing, what happens to such a person? Let's be honest here, Mike.
They
get in a lot of trouble, don't they?
No, they don't. You know, it's amazing what the...
I'm not saying they officially get thrown on their ear.
It's amazing.
But they may not get the best gunner jobs. They may not get the respect of their comrades. You know how it is.
It's amazing what G.I. Joe can get away with. When you're out in the field and your commanding general or your commanding officer or the vice president or a congressman, whoever it is, when they go up to and they ask them the question, how are things going over there, you'd be surprised at the honesty you get out of the troops. Those guys are battle-hardened, they're cynical,
Maybe when they're talking to the president.
No.
Although even then we've seen cases where they've had those news conferences and someone asks a difficult question of the president and they're sort of moved off camera or suggested that someone else should talk. We've seen these scripted press conferences in the past.
But when the Secretary of Defense went over there, that was not a scripted thing. That was, you know, the media was in tow, and the Secretary of Defense went over there and sat down and asked the troops, what do you need? And
they said body armor.
They said, I need to cover less territory. If we have more people over here so that I can cover 10 square yards instead of 15 square yards, relative term, then I'll be able to do my job better. I'm stretched too thin. I need more help over here. That's what they told the Secretary of Defense when he went over there.
The problem is what's even possible. I mean, let me play for you another clip from the interview with Dick Cheney.
Stand.
Takes a bit to warm up.
Of this nightmare scenario, that the U.S. is building up this Shiite-dominated Iraqi government with an enormous amount of military equipment, sophisticated training, and then in the end, they're going to turn against the United States.
Wolf, that's not going to happen. The problem
they're very warming up to Iran and Syria right now.
You can come up with all kinds of what-ifs. You got to deal with the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is we've made major progress. We've still got a lot of work to do. There are a lot of provinces in Iraq that are relatively quiet. There's more and more authority transferred to the Iraqis all the time. But the biggest problem we face right now is the danger that the United States will validate the terrorist strategy. That in fact, what will happen here with all of the debate over whether or not we ought to stay in Iraq, with the pressures from some quarters to get out of Iraq, if we were to do that, we would simply validate the terrorist strategy that says the Americans will not stay to complete the task.
Here's the Nuri al-Maliki.
That we don't have the stomach for the fight.
Here's the problem with
That's the biggest threat.
Here's the problem that I see it, and tell me if I'm wrong. That he seems to be more interested right now, the Prime Minister of Iraq, in establishing good relations with Iran and Syria than he is with moderate Arab governments, whether in Jordan or Egypt or Saudi Arabia.
I just think you're wrong, Wolf. He's been working with all of them. They're all in the neighborhood. He's got to develop relationships with all of them, and he is.
Because he's a Shia, and these moderate Arab governments are Sunni.
Now, Wolf is raising some real scary things here. What he's saying is, we're going to do, in effect, largely what we did in Afghanistan. What do we do in Afghanistan? Without meaning to. We're fighting the Soviet Union when they invade. We give all these arms and weaponry training to the Mujahideen. And lo and behold, people like Osama bin Laden use that training, those Mujahideen learn that training, and later on use it against us. Now Wolf Blitzer is saying, what are we doing? We're building up al-Maliki's Shia government, and Iran is Shia, and lo and behold, we may turn at least the counterweight of enemies between Iraq and Iran, and actually help Iran, actually use these weapons against us. And how does Dick Cheney respond? Oh, I don't want to deal with hypotheticals. You know, I want to believe that they're going to greet us with liberators with roses on the ground. That's not a hypothetical, that's reality. But your idea that actually a Shia prime minister installed by Muqtada al-Sadr, also a Shia, will aid the Shia of Iran, and the very fact that he's talking with Iran and he's not talking with Jordan and Egypt and the Sunni governments, that's not reality. You're living in a dream world.
All right.
Who's living in the dream world?
You cut the vice president off just a little bit too soon before he went on. What he said was, after Mr. Blitzer made the point that, you got a Shia running Iraq now, you've got the Shia over in Iran, they're playing footsie with Syria and Iran, and they're not reaching out to the Sunni governments and the other thing. The vice president makes the point that they're playing with everybody, and they have to because they're neighbors.
I'll play the clip if you want me to play the continuation clip.
But what the vice president then says is that more than a Shia, he believes that that Maliki is an Iraqi, not a Shia. And if he turns out to be an Iraqi, then they've bet on the right guy. If it turns out that he turns out not to be an Iraqi, that he turns out to be a Shia, then I'm gonna stick. We bet on the wrong guy.
Well, let me make a suggestion.
And they know more about it than I do.
Let me make a suggestion to you. Maliki is neither for Shia first nor for Iraq first. He's for Maliki first. He is like Saddam Hussein, like frankly virtually every Arab leader or Persian leader in the region, looking out for number one first. Mm-hmm. He knows where his bread is buttered. He knows he would not be prime minister of Iraq if it were not for Muqtada al-Sadr giving him the support he needed to be prime minister of Iraq. And just like American politicians remember where their support came from, al-Maliki remembers where his support came from, except you and I both know that Muqtada al-Sadr is a dangerous Shia terrorist who frankly is bent on ethnic cleansing of the Sunnis. And yet this guy, Muqtada al-Sadr's man, is the guy we're aiding in the hopes that he turns against this wonderful person who gave him support? There
comes a time when, politicians want to get involved with everybody. They want support from everybody, and it's a shame that you're right. Muqtada al-Sadr was the one who essentially brokered the deal that put him in power. Now, the president of the United States, President Bush, made it very clear in the negotiations, the robust diplomacy that the Democrats have been asking for. He made it very clear to the president of Iraq that al-Sadr has to go, that this can't last, that he's got to make a choice. It's either the American support or al-Sadr support. And the vice president, further on in this clip, doesn't come right out and say it, but essentially comes right out and says it, that the president of Iraq will do everything necessary to clean up the corrupt bad guys, which includes al-Sadr as articulated by Wolf Blitzer. Now, Mark, if he does it, then that proves that he's an Iraqi. If he doesn't do it, then that's strong evidence that he's not an Iraqi, that he's really either out for himself, as you hypothesize, or that he's a Shia, as Wolf Blitzer has hypothesized.
So our entire U.S. policy, hundreds, if not probably thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of wounded, likely hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives are resting on this bet. And it's not even a bet on an American. It's not even a bet on Dick Cheney and George Bush, who I don't have a lot of confidence in. It's a bet on this guy who's an Iraqi, who we didn't even want to be prime minister, but was installed by a vicious terrorist who's killed lots of Americans. We're betting all this money and all these lives on Maliki? One guy? What if he gets killed? That's not out of the question.
Well, if he gets killed, then obviously there will be a process in place. They do have a democracy there. They have voted to establish a constitution and a democracy.
The Soviet Union had a constitution too.
No, this is a little better than the Soviet. In fact, it's a lot better than the Soviet Union.
I actually think it's less stable. The Soviet Union was more stable.
Oh, exactly. And we're trying to achieve that stability through. We're trying to achieve stability through democracy, not stability through dictatorship. That's the difference. And if we can have stability through democracy, that's the true stability, because the Soviet Union ultimately did fall.
You know what's interesting? One of the only mistakes that Dick Cheney cops to is that he says that we misunderstood how much of a dictatorship mentality was in Iraq. When we come back, I want to play that clip and ask if, given that dictatorship mentality, maybe we should be less trusting of people like the Prime Minister al-Maliki. Folks, if you want to join in the discussion, you're always welcome to do so. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, and we'll be right back with CNN's video of Wolf Blitzer and Dick.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
What kind of man are you? I'm a father. Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schmasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids.
I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
I think you should wear a tie.
Dad, nobody wears ties to school.
Tie says you're serious. It'll make a good impression. And remember, you're there to study,
to learn, and to make something of myself. I got it.
Almost half of all UNCF students are the first in their family to go to college.
They have some great architecture classes.
Dad, I'm not really interested in architecture.
Well, keep your options open. And remember, no girls until
my work is done.
And I'd make sure that I got my lunch.
Dad, you're not going. I am.
I know.
Listen, we better get going. Don't want to be late the first day in.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're the first to go, you're going for a lot of people. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Magellan? No. Well, who knows what Magellan did?
Sail around the world.
Right. Now.
Sometimes, a child who doesn't seem interested is really a child with a speech or hearing problem.
Blackbeard? Who said Blackbeard? And what did Blackbeard do? He was a
pirate.
Time and again, it's been shown that a young student's ability to read and learn begins with speech and language and hearing skills.
Jamie, are you with us? Who can tell us?
He wanted to go to India.
Many communication disorders can be detected early and corrected, so learning and literacy skills can develop normally. Make sure your child has the speech, language, and hearing abilities to keep up in class. For more information, visit asha.org, a public service message from the American Speech, Language, Hearing Association and this station.
A new route to
Asia.
Good.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. My guest, Mike Lane, Republican strategist, and I are debating The Dick Cheney interview on CNN with Wolf Blitzer and what he's saying about the future of Iraq. We're going to get into the only mistake that Vice President Chaney copped to and what it had to do with Prime Minister al-Maliki. But first, I want to go to the phones. We have Arlene from Lorton. Arlene from Lorton, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Hi, I was wondering if you want to comment on all of the Shiites killing each other and the terrible things that are going on there, right? That was on the news today. There was another massacre, and it's all Shiites against Shiites now.
Well, that's interesting. Had you heard about this massacre, Mike?
I had. Arlene, are you talking about the headline that there were 200 insurgents that were killed in a raid by the government army?
She's gone.
All right.
I think we've lost Arlene. I have to admit, there's so many things, violent things coming out of Iraq every day that I don't necessarily keep up with each and every one. So I apologize on this. I do know that we have hundreds dying day by day by day, and there's all kinds of violence going on. So I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
If it's indeed the situation that I was referring to, which is that the government organized army conducted a raid on a company or a battalion of bad guys, they actually had a battle and they killed 200 insurgents, then I think this is good news. It's evidence that the al-Maliki government is doing what he's supposed to be doing, what he promised to be doing, and he needs to do more of it. We need to see more of this to get the trust. If it's something else, then I don't know enough about it, so I can't comment.
See, I'm afraid that whereas we like to think of this war is between us and the Iraqi government against the insurgents, that's not at all how the Iraqis are looking at it. They're looking at it as a power struggle, Shia versus Sunni, Shia clan versus Shia clan. Let me play for you the mistake that Dick Cheney admitted to. And, well, let's play it.
What was the...
30 years of Saddam's rule had really underestimated the extent to which 30 years of Saddam's rule had really hammered the population, especially the Shia population, into submissiveness. It was very hard for them to stand up and take responsibility, in part because anybody who'd done that in the past had had their heads chopped off.
You trust Nouri al-Maliki?
I do. At this point, I don't have any reason not to trust him.
Is he?
Let me stop right there, and then I'll go
right.
on. Do you have any reason not to trust Nouri al-Maliki? Because I do. I have reason not to trust him because we tried to go after al-Sadr in the past, and he told us no. But Dick Cheney, he has no reason not to trust him.
Well, I certainly think that the president and the vice president have more information on this. They've been the one talking with al-Maliki as to whether or not he's going to do something. They're the ones that have to make the assessment. I will agree with you. So far, his track record has been less than 100%.
Yes, and these people with the great intelligence are the same people who were listening to Curveball out of Germany instead of the 99% of intelligence that was telling us there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Well, let's see what Maliki does from now on.
Well, Wolf Blitzer asked him the very specific question, will he go after Muqtada al-Sadr? And he asked it about 4 or 5 or 6 times. Let's see if Cheney ever answers that question.
He does.
Going to go after Muqtada al-Sadr, this anti-American Shiite cleric who controls this Mehdi army?
I think he has demonstrated a willingness to take on any elements that violate the law.
You want him to arrest Muqtada al-Sadr?
He has been active just in recent weeks in going after the Mahdi army. There have been some 600 of them arrested within
Should he be arrested, Muqtada al-Sadr?
That's a decision that's got to be made.
Because, as you know, the first U.S. general there, Ricardo Sanchez, said this guy killed Americans, he has blood on his hands, he was wanted basically dead or alive. Whatever happened to that?
Wolf, you've got to let Nouri al-Maliki deal with the situation as he sees fit, and I think he will.
You think he's going to go after the Mehdi army?
I think he will go after all of those elements in Iraq that are violating the law, that are contributing to sectarian violence. They're criminal elements, they're Ba'athist former regime elements. All of them have to be the target of the effort.
Now let's listen to what happened here. Wolf Blitzer says he's going after Muqtada al-Sadr. He's going to go after those that violate the law. Well, should he arrest Muqtada al-Sadr? Well, there have been 600 people arrested within the last couple of days. Should Muqtada al-Sadr be arrested? Cheney, that's a decision that has to be made. Blitzer, because you know, we said we're going to get him dead or alive. Wolf will have to let Nouri al-Maliki deal with this. Do you think he will? I think he'll go after those elements that are contributing to sectarian violence, criminal elements, former Ba'ath regime elements. Why won't Dick Cheney say, yes, He'll go after Muqtada al-Sadr.
Because the last thing you want to do is have CNN broadcast to the world exactly what the internal strategy is. I think he essentially said everything but, yes, Muqtada al-Sadr is a dead man. But you're not going to tell him, okay, Muqtada, on 3 o'clock a.m., your time on Saturday morning, there's going to be a knock on the door. You don't telegraph these things, but he did say that he believes that President Maliki is prepared to and is going to take care of all those elements that need to be taken care of. No one can argue that Muqtada al-Sadr is not one of those elements that needs to be taken care of.
Well, it seems like that Dick Cheney can, because...
Well, we can't tell him it's going to happen at 3 o'clock. Why would you tell the bad guy when you're coming to get him?
Richard Sanchez, our general, do you think he was wrong to say we're going to get Muqtada al-Sadr dead or alive?
That was you know what, I would not have said that if I were him.
Was the President of the United States wrong to say we're going to get Osama bin Laden dead or alive?
No, Osama bin Laden had risen to the level where that sort of pledge was entirely appropriate.
Well, let me suggest to you that I think that Dick Cheney's hedging his bets. And he knows that Maliki may not be as good as we want him to be, and therefore he's not saying that he's going to get Muqtada al-Sadr, because he may not.
Well, if he's hedging his bets, then I'll be disappointed. I think what he's saying is that everybody who needs to be taken care of will be taken care of, but he's not telegraphing the time, the place, or the method.
Let me play a little bit more from the interview.
On in history, along with McNamara, as one of the worst secretaries of defense in history.
I just fundamentally disagree. You heard my speech when Don retired. I think he's done a superb job.
Do you agree with Dick Cheney that Don Rumsfeld has done a superb job?
You know, when somebody retires, you usually give them a gold watch. It's infrequent that you toss them under the bus and let them fend for themselves. Secretary Rumsfeld did a lot of very, very good things.
Really, what?
Well, his effort to reform the military and turn it into a lighter fighting force against all the resistance from the Army that they should not have resisted. They need to be quicker, lighter, faster, more mobile.
I think Don Rumsfeld should have been thrown under that bus. Let me go to one last issue, because it's the last issue that Wolf Blitzer raises, and arguably it's the most controversial in the entire interview.
We're out of time, but a couple issues I want to raise with you. Your daughter, Mary, she's pregnant. All of us are happy she's going to have a baby. You're going to have another grandchild. Some of the, some critics, though, are suggesting, for example, a statement from someone representing Focus on the Family. Mary Chaney's pregnancy raises the question of what's best for children. Just because it's possible to conceive a child outside of the relationship of a married mother and father doesn't mean it's best for the child. Do you want to respond to that?
No, I don't.
She's obviously a good daughter.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted. I'm about to have a 6th grandchild, Wolf, and obviously think the world of both my daughters and all of my grandchildren. And I think, frankly, you're out of line with that question.
I think all of us appreciate.
I think you're
your daughter. No, we like your daughters. Believe me, I'm very, very sympathetic to Liz and to Mary. I like them both. That was just a question that's come up, and it's a responsible, fair question. Right?
I just fundamentally disagree with your
I want to congratulate you on having another grandchild.
Now, that was a very interesting exchange to me. You can hear Wolf Blitzer, he's very uncomfortable about it.
The vice president put him back in a corner, and it was an uncomfortable
corner. Why
corner.
is it Wolf Blitzer that's creating the uncomfortableness? What Wolf Blitzer does is he quotes Focus on the Family, which has largely supported the Republicans. Now, what the vice president says is, you, Wolf Blitzer, are out of line with that question. Why didn't the vice president say, Focus on the Family is out of line with criticizing my daughter?
Here's what I think Wolf Blitzer was trying to do.
Was Focus on the Family out of line or not?
If you had done it, yes, Focus on the Family was out of line.
Why can't the vice president say that?
If you had done it as a Democratic operative or a Democratic constituent or a Democratic Party believer or whatever it is, your objective would have been the same as Wolf Blitzer's. Your objective is to raise the issue and trying to create a visible wedge between the vice president and part of the base of the electorate that supports him.
Is that wedge there?
That's entirely appropriate for you or any other Democrat to do. it's not appropriate for Wolf Blitzer, representing CNN, to try and drive that same wedge between the vice president and part of his base.
Do you think that the vice president believes that focus on the family was out of line?
In this particular case, I think the vice president would probably, if he had a private moment with the focus on the family, he'd tell him to pipe down.
I think he would too.
But you don't say those things publicly.
Wait a minute. President Clinton was asked about Sister Souljah. I mean, they've been asked Bush about John McCain. It's perfectly fair, I think, to say to someone, hey, these people that support your party are saying this thing. Do you support it or not? And President Clinton had that famous Sister Souljah moment where he actually told someone in his own party, one of his supporters, to pipe down. Was it unfair to ask Bill Clinton about Sister Souljah? Because I don't think so.
You know, your needs when you're a candidate trying to get a headline and trying to get attention are different from when you're the sitting vice president.
Is it unfair to ask the vice president, was focus on the family wrong? That's all. Blitzer didn't say he was right. In fact, Blitzer, it seemed to me, was very clearly thought focus on the family was wrong too.
I think Blitzer was acting like a Democratic operative. It would have been entirely appropriate for you to try and drive a political wedge between two people. It's not appropriate for a journalist to try and drive that same political wedge.
You're talking about driving a wedge.
Yes.
It was a question.
It wasn't.
Focus on the family.
It was a political question.
Family.
Focus
on the family. Attacked a family. They're focused on attacking families. Okay. Focus on the family. Attack Dick Cheney's family.
Right.
Now, Dick Cheney could have easily said, I think focus on the family is out of line. And they could have gone on. But obviously the next question is, well, why is it wrong for your family to have equal rights to have children? Why is it wrong for, why is it okay for you to have a grandchild, but indeed you support laws to prevent other gay couples across the nation from having children? It's a question of hypocrisy.
Well, I don't think the vice president has ever been on record as supporting any kind of legislation that would prevent people from having children. That's
that would take away rights of adoption. I mean, there's certainly elements of the Republican Party that do that.
I've never seen the vice president opine
you have
in the affirmative on that.
President of the United States for the constitutional amendment to ban same-sex couples from getting married. We know one of the main things that does is it harms their kids. Because their kids, whether, I can give you examples, whether at the schoolhouse where someone goes to pick up the child and they're not even allowed to pick up the child because they're considered a stranger, or for health care power of attorneys or things like that, it harms the children not to have that relationship. But the point is this, overall, apart from the question, the vice president's daughter is exercising her freedom as American to have a child.
Right.
He's attacked by a group that has largely supported the Republican Party, focus on the family. Why can't he come out and say, focus on the family shouldn't be making comments on my family?
There were two wrongs here. The first wrong was focus on the family, which apparently feels now they have to tell the vice president how he should run his family, and they were dead wrong about that. The second wrong was Wolf Blitzer, who was entirely inappropriate to try and act like a Democratic operative and drive a wedge in there.
All he did was ask the question was focus on the family appropriate? Why couldn't Dick Cheney have just said no?
So when you have a choice of whether or not you're going to tell off your friends in public or tell off a guy who's trying to embarrass you in public, you obviously choose to tell off the guy who's trying to embarrass you. He put Wolf Blitzer in a very uncomfortable corner, and it was good for Blitzer. He deserved to be there.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but I disagree. I think that when your friends are doing something fundamentally wrong, like Focus on the Family did, you got to tell your friends you're doing the wrong thing.
I'm sure
Dick Cheney should have done it. He should have done it publicly.
I'm sure he's done it in
private.
That's
all the time we have. Tune in tomorrow. I'm going to have Guy James on the show. We're going to talk about talk radio.